For decades, the United States was seen as the greatest military power in modern history. Its defense budget exceeds that of many countries combined. Its military technology is considered the most advanced on the planet. Its aircraft carriers patrol virtually every ocean, and its power projection capability is something no other country has been able to fully replicate. Because of this, there is a widespread belief in the world. The idea that, in a direct war, the United States would always have an advantage over any adversary. But recently, an analysis caught the attention of experts in geopolitics and military strategy. A professor known as Professor Jiang, an expert in strategic studies and international conflicts, raised a question that seems to contradict this traditional view. According to him, there is a little understood factor when we talk about a possible conflict between the United States and Iran. And this factor can completely transform the outcome of a war. The question he raises is simple, but extremely disturbing to many analysts. What if the United States couldn't win a war against Iran? At first glance, this idea seems absurd. After all, we are talking about a military superpower against a country that, in terms of military budget and technology, is far behind. But when we start to look deeper into the strategic reality of the region, the story begins to change. Because modern wars are not won just with more weapons or more money. They depend on geography, logistics, alliances, prolonged resistance, and, most importantly, the ability to transform the battlefield into an impossible environment for the enemy. And it is exactly at this point that the great mystery raised by Professor Jiang comes into play. According to him, Iran has a unique combination of factors that could make any war against the country extremely long, extremely expensive, and potentially impossible to win decisively. We are not just talking about conventional military forces. We are talking about regional strategy, control of vital energy routes, asymmetric warfare, influence over armed groups in several countries, and a geography that has defeated countless invaders throughout history. But to understand why this analysis is causing so much debate among military experts, we must first understand something fundamental. We need to understand how America's military power really works, and why it doesn't always guarantee victory in complex wars. And that's exactly what we're going to explore now. To understand why Professor Jiang's analysis has drawn so much attention, we first need to look at how the military power of the United States is perceived in the world. Since the end of World War II, the United States has built something that no other country has been able to fully replicate: an ability to project military force into virtually any region on the planet. Today, the USA has hundreds of military bases spread across several continents. Its defense budget is greater than that of several military powers combined. Furthermore, the country invests billions every year in research and development of new warfare technologies. We are talking about hypersonic weapons, planes invisible to radar, advanced artificial intelligence systems, military satellites, and a global surveillance network that monitors practically all strategic points on the planet. Another symbol of this power are American aircraft carriers. Each aircraft carrier strike group functions practically as a floating military base. It can transport dozens of fighters, helicopters, missile defense systems, as well as thousands of soldiers and military equipment. These gigantic ships allow the United States to project military power even thousands of kilometers away from its territory. That is why, over the last few decades, whenever a major international conflict arose, there was a very common phrase among international policy analysts: if the United States enters the war, the outcome is practically already decided. And in some cases, this actually seemed to be true. In the Gulf War in 1991, for example, a coalition led by the United States quickly defeated the Iraqi army, which at the time was considered one of the largest in the world. The technological and aerial superiority was so great that many experts began to believe that modern wars would be decided quickly by whoever had more technology and more firepower. However, recent history has begun to show something much more complex. Conflicts such as Afghanistan and Iraq have shown that having the most powerful army in the world does not necessarily mean winning a war clearly and definitively. Even with all their military superiority, the United States has faced wars that lasted years, some for decades, with extremely high human, political, and economic costs. And it is exactly this lesson that begins to change the way strategists analyze possible future conflicts. Because when we talk about a country like Iran, we are not just talking about a conventional war between two armies. We are talking about a conflict that could involve extremely difficult geography, asymmetric warfare, regional networks of allies, and a strategic environment that could turn any military intervention into a much bigger problem than it appears at first glance. And that's exactly why Professor Jiang believes the question isn't just who has the strongest army. The real question is another: who is more prepared? To turn war into a long, expensive, and extremely difficult game for the opponent? And to understand this, we need to look at a factor that often decides wars before the first shot is even fired: geography. And when we talk about Iran's geography, we begin to understand why so many strategists consider this country one of the most difficult places in the world for any military power to face. When military experts analyze a possible conflict, there is a factor that many people tend to ignore, but which historically decides the fate of many wars: geography. And when we talk about Iran, we are talking about one of the most difficult territories on the planet for any foreign army to operate. Iran is a huge country. Its territory is more than 4 times larger than that of Germany, and has an enormous diversity of natural terrain that acts almost like a natural fortress. Much of the country is dominated by gigantic mountain ranges, such as the Zagros Mountains in the west and Alborz Mountains in the north. These mountainous regions create natural obstacles that make the movement of large military forces, especially tanks, heavy vehicles, and logistical equipment, extremely difficult. Historically, mountainous terrain favors those who are defending, not those who are attacking. This happens because troops who know the territory can use the mountains to hide bases, weapons depots, tunnels, and defense positions that are almost impossible to detect or completely destroy. Additionally, Iran has large areas of deserts and plateaus, where temperatures can be extremely high during the day and very low at night. This type of environment puts enormous pressure on any army that relies on long supply lines. In modern warfare, logistics are everything. Armies need fuel, ammunition, food, spare parts, and constant support. If these logistical routes are attacked or disrupted, even the most powerful army can begin to face serious difficulties. And Iranian territory creates exactly this kind of challenge. Another important factor is that many of the country's major cities are surrounded by mountainous areas or difficult terrain, which makes rapid military operations difficult and increases the cost of any prolonged occupation attempt. But Iran's geography is not just important on land. The country also has an extremely sensitive strategic position on the global map. It is next to the Persian Gulf, one of the most important regions in the world when we talk about energy and international trade. And there is a specific point in this region that can completely change any war scenario. A point so strategic that some analysts say controlling it could directly impact the world economy. This place is known as the Strait of Hormuz, and understanding the role of this strait is essential to understanding why many experts believe a conflict with Iran could quickly escalate into a global crisis. To understand why a conflict involving Iran worries strategists and economists around the world so much, we need to look at one of the most sensitive places on the planet: the Strait of Hormuz. This strait is a relatively narrow sea passage that connects the Persian Gulf to the Indian Ocean. At first glance, it may seem like just another maritime route among many others, but in reality, it functions as one of the most important arteries of the global economy. Every day, a huge amount of oil and natural gas passes through this point. It is estimated that around a fifth of all oil traded in the world passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Countries such as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Iraq, and Iran itself depend on this route to export energy to markets in Asia, Europe, and other regions. This means that any instability in this area could have immediate effects on energy prices worldwide. Now imagine what would happen in a war scenario if a direct conflict between the United States and Iran begins. If so, one of Iran's first strategies could be to try to disrupt or threaten maritime traffic in the Strait of Hormuz. And Iran has several ways of doing this. The country has invested for decades in a strategy known as asymmetric naval warfare. Instead of trying to compete directly with large navies like the United States, Iran has developed methods that are more unpredictable and difficult to neutralize. This includes the use of armed speedboats, sea mines, coastal missiles, and naval drones. These systems may not look as impressive as large destroyers or aircraft carriers, but they have an important advantage. They are difficult to detect and can cause significant damage. Even small interruptions in the flow of oil tankers could generate panic in international markets. Oil prices could skyrocket quickly, affecting transportation, industrial production, food prices, and virtually the entire global economy. Therefore, the Strait of Hormuz is often described by strategic analysts as one of the most critical choke points on the planet. And it is exactly this type of geographic advantage that makes many experts believe that a conflict with Iran would not just be a regional war. It could quickly turn into an international crisis with global economic impact. But indirect control over sea lanes is not the only strategic tool Iran has developed over the past few decades. There is another element of Iranian strategy that deeply concerns military analysts. A type of strategy that doesn't just depend on traditional armies, but on something much more difficult to fight. We are talking about the so-called asymmetric war. When you compare the military power of the United States with that of Iran using raw numbers, such as military budget, number of fighter planes, or technology, the difference seems enormous. The United States spends hundreds of billions of dollars every year on defense. Iran, on the other hand, has a much smaller military budget. But it is precisely because of this difference that Iran has developed a completely different strategy to face much more powerful adversaries. This strategy is known as asymmetric warfare. Asymmetric warfare occurs when a country or military group avoids traditional direct confrontations and instead uses methods that exploit the opponent's weaknesses. Rather than compete with large naval fleets or large mechanized armies, Iran has invested in systems that can make a big impact at relatively low costs. A clear example of this are ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. Over the past few decades, Iran has built one of the largest missile arsenals in the Middle East. These missiles can target military bases, strategic installations, and critical infrastructure from great distances. This means that, even without completely dominating the airspace, the country still has the means to attack important targets. Another important element of this strategy is military drones. In recent years, Iran has invested heavily in developing reconnaissance drones and attack drones. These systems are relatively inexpensive compared to traditional fighter aircraft, but can be used for surveillance, precision strikes, and saturation of enemy defenses. Furthermore, the country has developed a network of underground bases, military tunnels, and facilities hidden in the mountains, which make it very difficult to completely destroy its military capabilities. But perhaps the most important aspect of Iran's asymmetric strategy lies outside its own borders. For decades, the country has built relationships with various armed groups and regional allies in different parts of the Middle East. This means that in the event of a conflict, the battlefield could quickly expand to multiple regions at once. Instead of a war concentrated in a single territory, a much more complex situation could emerge, with tensions and clashes spread across several countries in the region. This type of scenario creates an enormous strategic challenge for any military power, because the more conflict fronts emerge, the more difficult it becomes to control the situation and maintain efficient military operations. And this is exactly why many analysts believe that a conflict with Iran could quickly stop being a simple war between two countries. It could escalate into a much broader regional conflict, And to understand the true scope of this possibility, we need to analyze another fundamental element of Iranian strategy: a network of influence that extends far beyond the country's borders. To understand why many analysts believe that a conflict with Iran could become extremely complex, it is necessary to look at something that goes far beyond the Iranian territory itself. Over the past few decades, Iran has developed a network of political and military influence in various parts of the Middle East. This strategy does not only depend on the country's traditional army, but on alliances, partnerships, and groups that operate in different regions. In practice, this means that any conflict involving Iran could have repercussions far beyond its borders. Instead of a war limited to a single country, there is a risk that the conflict will spread to several parts of the Middle East at the same time. This strategy is often called by experts a regional network of influence. The objective is simple: to create a support structure that can act on different fronts, making any attempt to completely isolate the country in the event of war difficult. This influence can be observed in several places in the region. In Lebanon, for example, there is Hezbollah, a political and military group that has a strong presence in the country, and that over the years has developed great military capacity. In Syria, Iran built a strategic relationship with the Syrian government during years of civil war, which increased its presence and influence in the territory. In Iraq, different armed groups with close political and ideological links to Iran have also become important actors in the regional dynamics. Furthermore, the Yemen region has also become an important point of geopolitical tension, with conflicts involving different regional powers. For many military strategists, this network creates a very particular scenario. If a direct conflict between the United States and Iran were to break out, it would not just be a war between two armies. A scenario could emerge with multiple sources of tension spread across the region, involving different actors and interests. This would make the conflict much more difficult to control. Instead of a single, defined battlefield, there would be multiple potential fronts, each requiring attention, military resources, and complex strategic decisions. And the more fronts emerge in a conflict, the greater the risk of escalation and unpredictable consequences. But there is another factor that makes this scenario even more delicate. A factor that often decides the outcome of modern wars before the conflict even ends. We are talking about time. Because some wars are quick and decisive, but others turn into long, exhausting, and extremely expensive conflicts. And it is exactly this type of war that many experts believe could happen in a possible confrontation involving Iran. When many people imagine a modern war involving a military superpower, they think of a rapid conflict with advanced technology, precision strikes, and a relatively quick victory. But recent history has shown that the reality can be very different. In recent decades, two conflicts have profoundly changed the way experts analyze modern wars: the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq. At the beginning of these conflicts, the United States demonstrated enormous military superiority. In just a few weeks, American forces and their allies managed to overthrow governments that had been in power for years. From a traditional military point of view, it looked like a clear victory. But what happened next completely changed the scenario. After the fall of governments, conflicts began to transform into prolonged wars, marked by insurgencies, unexpected attacks, guerrillas, and enormous difficulty in stabilizing territories. In Afghanistan, for example, the war began in 2001 and became the longest conflict in United States history. For years, even with advanced technology, international support, and enormous military investment, the situation remained unstable. Something similar happened in Iraq. After the initial invasion in 2003, the country faced years of internal conflict, insurgencies, and violence, creating an environment that was extremely difficult to control. These examples taught an important lesson for military strategists. Winning the first phase of a war does not necessarily mean winning the conflict as a whole. Overthrowing governments or destroying military bases can be relatively quick for a powerful army. but maintaining stability, controlling complex territories, and dealing with prolonged resistance can make any war a challenge lasting years, or even decades. And it is exactly this type of scenario that many experts believe could arise in a possible conflict with Iran. The country has a large population, a vast territory, difficult geography, and a military structure prepared to withstand prolonged conflicts. Furthermore, its military strategy does not rely solely on conventional battles, but on a combination of territorial resistance, asymmetric warfare, and regional pressure. This means that any war could quickly stop being a quick military operation and turn into a long, expensive, and politically exhausting conflict. And in protracted wars, the most important factor is often no longer just military power. The real deciding factor becomes who can bear the cost of war for the longest time. And this is exactly where another crucial question arises. If such a conflict were to occur, what would be the consequences for the entire world? Because a confrontation involving a global power and one of the most strategic countries in the Middle East would hardly be limited to the military field alone. It could cause impacts that cross borders and affect economies, markets, and governments across the planet. That's exactly what we're going to analyze now. When experts analyze a potential conflict between the United States and Iran, they rarely look just at the battlefield. This is because wars between strategically important countries are almost never limited to those directly involved. Most of the time, the effects spread quickly throughout the world, and in the event of a conflict with Iran, many analysts believe the consequences could be global. The first impact would likely be economic. As we saw previously, the Middle East is one of the most important regions on the planet when it comes to energy. Many countries depend on the oil and natural gas that comes out of this region to keep their economies running. If a military conflict affected strategic routes like the Strait of Hormuz, the flow of oil could be interrupted or reduced. Even a small disruption could generate an immediate reaction in international markets. Oil prices could rise rapidly, which would affect transportation, industrial production, food prices, and virtually every sector of the global economy. This could cause inflation in several countries, put pressure on governments, and generate economic instability in different regions of the world. But the impact would not just be economic. A conflict of this type could also provoke political instability in several countries in the Middle East. The region is already marked by historical rivalries, political disputes, and tensions between different regional powers. A war involving Iran could increase these tensions, creating new indirect clashes or disputes between different regional actors. In addition, there is also the factor of international alliances. Great powers such as Russia, China, European countries, and other nations have strategic interests in the region. This means that any major conflict could generate diplomatic pressure, political disputes, and even changes in the global balance of power. Another important point is the impact on global financial markets. Wars involving strategic regions often generate uncertainty in the markets. Investors become more cautious, stock markets can react negatively, and investment flows can change quickly. In some cases, international crises can also provoke changes in the way countries deal with energy security, military alliances, and diplomatic relations. Therefore, many analysts believe that a conflict involving Iran would not just be a regional event. It could become one of the most important geopolitical events of the century, with consequences that would affect countries far beyond the Middle East. But even in the face of all these risks, there is a central question that continues to divide experts in military strategy. After all, if a conflict actually happened, who would have the advantage in a long-term war? This question takes us back to the central point raised by Professor Jiang, because perhaps the real secret of modern warfare is not just who has the most weapons, but in those who can best bear the weight of a prolonged conflict. When we analyze wars throughout history, a pattern appears again and again. Often, the winner is not just whoever has the most weapons or technology, but whoever can resist the longest. This principle is known by strategists as war of attrition. In conflicts of this type, the objective is not just to defeat the enemy quickly, but to make the war so long, expensive, and difficult that the adversary begins to lose political, economic, or social support to continue fighting. And it is precisely at this point that many analysts say a possible conflict with Iran could become extremely complicated. The United States has enormous military and economic capabilities, but it also faces an important factor in protracted wars: domestic political pressure. In democracies, long wars tend to generate intense debates within the country itself. As time passes, questions arise about costs, human losses, economic impacts, and what exactly the ultimate goal of the conflict is. This happens. He was born in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. In all these cases, even with military superiority, political and social exhaustion ended up becoming a decisive factor. On the other hand, countries that are defending their own territory often have a different motivation. Historically, populations that feel they are defending their own sovereignty have often been able to sustain resistance for very long periods. Furthermore, Iran has spent decades preparing for a scenario in which it would have to face more powerful adversaries. Much of its military doctrine was built precisely on this idea: to resist, prolong the conflict, and increase the cost for any invading force. This includes strategies such as dispersion of forces, use of underground structures, indirect attacks, and regional pressure. In such a scenario, the war could turn into something very different from a quick military campaign. It could become a protracted conflict, where each side tries to test the other's resilience. And that's exactly why many experts say that in modern warfare, the most important question isn't just who starts stronger. The real question is, who can keep fighting when the war stops being quick and starts becoming long, expensive, and unpredictable? And this question brings us to the final point of Professor Jiang's analysis, because, in the end, the real mystery behind a possible war between the United States and Iran may not just lie in weapons, armies, or technology. It may lie in something much more fundamental about the nature of modern warfare. After analyzing all of these factors, military power, geography, asymmetric strategy, regional influence, and the risk of protracted wars, we begin to understand why Professor Jiang's analysis has generated so much debate among experts. Because in the end, the issue is not as simple as comparing numbers of tanks, planes, or military budget. Modern wars are much more complex. They involve economics, logistics, politics, international alliances, control of strategic routes, and mainly the ability to resist long conflicts. And when all of these elements come into play at the same time, the outcome of a war becomes much less predictable than many people imagine. The United States remains one of the greatest military powers in history. Its technology, its mobilization capacity, and its global network of alliances are extremely powerful factors. But what recent history has shown is that the strongest army does not always win in the simplest or fastest way. Conflicts such as Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq have shown that wars can turn into much more complex challenges than any initial planning foresees. And it is exactly this point that Professor Jiang tries to highlight. In this view, the real mystery is not just whether the United States could defeat Iran in direct battles. The deeper question is another. What would happen if this war was not quick? If it turned into a long conflict with multiple fronts, global economic impacts, and growing political pressure? In this type of scenario, the decisive factor may no longer be just military power. It could become strategic resistance. Who can maintain operations for longer? Who best bears the economic and political costs? Who can transform the war environment into something increasingly difficult for the opponent? This is why many experts say that the wars of the 21st century are very different from the wars of the past. Today, winning a war does not just mean winning battles. It means being able to control the consequences of a conflict that could affect the entire world. And perhaps this is exactly why so many powers avoid direct confrontations in strategic regions as much as possible. Because when a war starts in such a sensitive place on the planet, it is almost impossible to predict how far its consequences could reach. Now, I want to know your opinion. Do you think a war between the United States and Iran would be quick, or could it turn into a long, unpredictable conflict? Leave your opinion in the comments. And if you like in-depth analyses of geopolitics, military strategy, and the history of conflicts, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for future videos. What if one of the greatest military powers in history faced a war it might not be able to win? What if, behind the headlines, superficial analyses and traditional narratives about military power, there existed a strategic factor that could completely change the outcome of a conflict between the United States and Iran? In recent years, a silent debate has begun to gain momentum among experts in geopolitics, military strategy, and international relations. The question is not just that who has the largest army or the most advanced technology. The real question is much more disturbing. Could a war between the United States and Iran turn into an unwinnable conflict quickly? This is exactly the question raised by an analyst known as Professor Jiang, whose analysis of the strategic balance between the two powers has begun to attract attention in academic and military circles. According to this view, there is a strategic mystery behind the possibility of a war that the United States could have enormous difficulty in winning. At first glance, this idea seems contradictory. When we think about the military power of the United States, we are talking about the greatest war machine ever built. The country has the largest military budget in the world, extremely advanced military technology, bases spread across several continents, and the ability to project power in practically any region on the planet. Furthermore, the American naval force dominates the oceans, with gigantic aircraft carriers capable of launching attacks from thousands of kilometers away. The Air Force has state-of-the-art fighter jets, sophisticated intelligence systems, and a global satellite-based surveillance network. For decades, this superiority created a very strong narrative in international politics. The idea that, in a direct confrontation, the United States would have an advantage over practically any opponent. But when we start to look deeper into the scenario of a possible conflict with Iran, the story starts to get much more complex. Because modern wars are not decided just by who has the most planes, the most tanks, or the most money. They are influenced by factors such as geography, logistics, regional alliances, military strategy, and the ability to sustain a protracted conflict. And this is exactly where the debate begins to change. Iran is not just another Middle Eastern country. It occupies an extremely strategic position on the global map. Its territory is huge. Its geography is complex, and its location places the country close to one of the most important energy routes on the planet. Furthermore, over the past few decades, Iran has developed a very particular military strategy, a strategy designed specifically to face much more powerful adversaries. Instead of competing directly with great powers in the same type of traditional warfare, the country built a doctrine based on asymmetric warfare, prolonged resistance, and regional influence. This means that, in a possible conflict, the scenario could become very different from what many people imagine. Instead of a quick, decisive war, some experts believe the conflict could evolve into something much longer, much more complex, and much more unpredictable. And it is exactly this scenario that is at the center of Professor Jiang's analysis. According to him, there is a fundamental element that is often ignored when we talk about modern wars, an element that has already changed the fate of several conflicts throughout history. And to understand this point, we first need to analyze something that usually decides wars before the first shot is even fired. Before we continue and delve even deeper into this strategic mystery involving the United States, Iran, and the possible outcome of a war that many believe to be unpredictable, I want to make a quick request. If this type of analysis on geopolitics, international conflicts, military strategy, and the behind the scenes of major global decisions interest you, then this video was made exactly for you. Here on the channel, the idea is not just to show headlines or repeat what already appears in the news. The objective is to understand what is really happening behind the world's major events, analyze strategic factors that often go unnoticed, and explain why certain decisions can completely change the global balance. And so that more people can find this type of content, your participation is very important. So take advantage now and leave your like on the video, because this really helps the algorithm to understand that this content is relevant and that more people interested in geopolitics and international analysis can also watch it. And I also want to know your opinion. Do you think that in a real war scenario, the United States would have a complete advantage over Iran? Or do you believe that this conflict could become much more complicated than it seems? Write here in the comments what you think about this. I really enjoy reading your opinions because very interesting debates often arise that help to delve even deeper into the topic. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now, so you don't miss the next videos where we continue exploring topics such as military strategy, history of conflicts, global power, and the decisions that shape the future of the world. Because what we are going to analyze from now on begins to reveal something that few observers realize when they talk about a possible confrontation between the United States and Iran, a factor that, for many military strategists, can be much more decisive than the size of an army or the number of weapons available. And it all starts with something that has existed for thousands of years, but that continues to decide wars to this day. Now we need to look at a factor that many military analysts consider decisive before any war even begins: the terrain on which that war would be fought. In military strategy, there is an old phrase that continues to be repeated in military academies around the world. Geography does not change. Governments change, weapons evolve, technologies appear, but the terrain is still there, influencing every strategic decision. And when we start looking at the map of Iran, it becomes easier to understand why so many experts say that a conflict in that region would be much more complicated than it seems at first glance. Iran is not a small or simple country from a geographical point of view. We are talking about a huge territory with extremely varied landscapes and, in many cases, difficult for traditional military operations. Large mountain ranges dominate important parts of the country, creating natural barriers that make it difficult to move troops and heavy equipment. Mountains are not just physical obstacles, they also offer enormous advantages to those defending their territory. Throughout history, mountainous regions have always favored resistance strategies, ambushes, and prolonged defense. When a foreign army needs to operate in such an environment, logistics become much more complex. Tanks, armored vehicles, artillery systems, and supply trucks need to move along specific, often predictable routes. This creates opportunities for unexpected attacks, disruptions to supply lines, and continued attrition of invading forces. And in modern warfare, logistics are everything. Without fuel, ammunition, and safe transportation routes, even the most powerful army can begin to struggle. In addition to mountains, Iran also has large areas of deserts and plateaus. These environments present challenges of their own. During the day, temperatures can rise significantly, requiring adapted equipment and constant logistical support for troops and vehicles. At night, the environment can change completely, bringing intense cold and difficult operating conditions. This type of land may seem empty at first glance, but in reality, it creates an environment where familiarity with the territory can make a huge difference. Another important point is that many cities and strategic centers in Iran are positioned in a way that makes any military advance slow and complicated. Unlike some regions where capitals and infrastructure are exposed in flat areas, in the Iranian case, many of these locations are surrounded by difficult terrain or mountainous areas. This means that any attempt at territorial control would require time, detailed planning, and a large, amount of military resources. But Iran's geography doesn't just influence operations on the ground. It also plays a huge role in the strategic balance of the Middle East. The country is located close to the Persian Gulf, a region that contains some of the largest oil and natural gas reserves on the planet. This detail completely changes the geopolitical equation because it transforms any conflict in this area into something with a potential impact on the entire world. When oil tankers cross the Gulf every day, transporting energy to economies in Asia, Europe, and beyond, we are seeing a flow that supports much of the global economy. And Iran is positioned exactly in a region where this flow passes very close to its territory. This means that, in a scenario of tension or conflict, the simple possibility of interrupting these routes would be enough to cause international concern. This type of strategic position has always been considered an important factor by military analysts. This is not just about direct military force, but about influence over critical points in the global system. Throughout history, places that control trade or energy routes tend to gain enormous strategic weight, often greater than their conventional military power. And that is exactly why some experts believe that a conflict involving Iran could not be analyzed simply as a traditional war between two countries. The combination of complex geography, strategic position, and military preparation focused on resistance creates a scenario very different from what many people imagine when they think of modern wars. As you, our military strategists, study this type of scenario, a question begins to appear more frequently. To what extent would the technological advantage of a superpower be sufficient to overcome all these factors combined? Because when terrain, logistics, and geopolitical position enter the equation, things start to get much more complex than simple comparisons of military power. And before we move on to the next point of this analysis, I want to know what you think about this. When you look at the map and think about a possible conflict in this region, do you believe that geography could really change the outcome of a war? Write here in the comments something like "Geography decides wars" or "Technology wins all." I really want to see which of these ideas you believe has more weight in this type of scenario. If you've made it this far at the end of this video, it already shows that you really enjoy in-depth analyses of geopolitics, military strategy, and the major conflicts that can change the balance of the world. And this is exactly the type of content we explore here on the channel. Now, I want to know who actually watched until the end. Go here in the comments and write the phrase "I reached the end." This way I can identify who is part of the channel's most engaged audience. And if you want, you can also write your opinion. Do you believe that a war between the United States and Iran would be quick? Or would it become a long and unpredictable conflict? If this video helped you understand this scenario better and provided a deeper insight into this topic, leave a like. This greatly helps the channel reach more people interested in topics such as geopolitics, international conflicts, global strategy, and the history of wars. And if you're not already part of the channel, take the opportunity to subscribe now. Every week, there are new videos analyzing global events, disputes between powers, military strategies, and the behind-the-scenes of the decisions that shape the future of the world. And don't leave now. The next video is already appearing on your screen, where we continue exploring themes that are changing the international scenario and that many people have not yet fully understood. Click on it and keep watching, because the next analysis will further expand everything we discussed here today.